Welcome to the What Really Happened radio show. Putting America first, second, and third. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It is Tuesday, October 22nd, 2013, and if I sound a little bit muffled, we're having some microphone issues out here. I'm trying to fix it as we go along. I think that's a little bit better. So I'm probably going to sound a little bit different. Anyway, we've got a lot of stuff to talk about today. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443, 800-313-9443. Manny is sitting in our control room, twiddling the dials, keeping us out of trouble, ready to answer the phone when you call on in. Just a reminder, tomorrow we're going to have Keith Johnson from Activist Post talking about gun control. Thursday we're going to have Brandon Turbeville talking about Syria and Egypt. We're going to have Claire on Friday, and a reminder that tonight I will be the on-air guest of Coast to Coast AM radio for all 3 hours of the program tonight, so you might want to tune on in. We're going to be talking about a wide array of topics, TWA 800, NSA, Kennedy assassination. We're just going to cover the whole thing from top to bottom there. So anyway, getting right here at the top, healthcare.gov is basically being viewed as a zombie. In other words, the Walking Dead. And it is very much, it's a disaster. Jon Stewart was saying some very unflattering things about it on his show, saying that you cannot spin this, and he used a word I can't use here on the radio. But it is an absolute unequivocal mess, and Obama is out there trying to convince everybody that the basic concept is just fine, the Obamacare law is just fine, we're just having a few little tiny glitches here, and, you know, we'll get the situation taken care of. Apparently, Sean Hannity was interviewing an Obamacare representative and said, have you actually found anybody, just one person in the entire United States, who actually likes the website and thinks it's doing a good job? And came back and said, no, not one. It's an absolute unmitigated disaster. Now, we're hearing a couple of different stories. Corporate media is reporting that the problem with the Obamacare website, it wasn't tested, we didn't know, but we're getting another story that in point of fact, just a couple of weeks before the launch, they did run a test where they were going to simulate 1,000 people logging into the website and trying to use it at the same time, and after it reached only 100, it locked up. So they had a test that showed it was not going to work, and they went ahead with it anyway. Kind of reminds me of the Hubble Space Telescope, where they had a test that showed it was out of focus. And NASA went ahead and launched that thing anyway. It's all being driven by ego and that $200 billion a year tax revenue gain that they're looking forward to lure new lenders now that the debt ceiling's been waived. And, you know, this is not good decision making on the part of the president. He should have gone ahead with that original House deal to delay Obamacare and raise the debt ceiling and fix the problems. Now there is a discussion in Washington, D.C. about, well, since nobody can actually sign up for Obamacare even if they want it, should the IRS be held off from imposing the fines? And we're getting from the White House kind of this silent treatment. It's a cash grab. This is just another cash grab, just like carbon taxes, which are coming back again, by the way, because they're not going to get the money from Obamacare they thought they would. If this government were really concerned about your health care, they'd be doing something about those 400,000 Americans who die every year from medical mistakes by doctors, hospitals, and pharmacies. They'd be taking the toxic adjuvants out of vaccines. They'd be taking the toxic additives out of corporate-produced food in the supermarket. They would at least be labeling, if not banning, GMOs. But they're not doing any of that because they're not really concerned about your health. They're concerned about your wallet, because that's what this is all about. Your wallet. They absolutely see the solution to every one of their self-made problems as lying in your wallet, and that's what this is all going on here. Now, there was an interesting story, this is reported over at CNBC, about how the House committee that's responsible for Obamacare oversight was asking for guidance from John McAfee. And we already know from when John was on our show, he would have told him, the system has to be scrapped. There's no way to fix it in its current form. You're going to be faster and cheaper to just throw it all out and start all over again, probably take about a year. And then, of course, we also found out from John's appearance on our show that the House committee responsible for Obamacare rescinded their invitation. They don't want anybody to come in and tell them what's wrong. They're looking for people to come in and say, oh, yes, it's a glitch. We can fix it by November 1st, and the IRS can start assessing fines on January 1 of next year. They're looking for decision support. They're not actually looking for what's going on. Now, CNN is reporting that Obamacare is proving to be completely unaffordable for many Americans because the Obamacare-compliant health insurance is much more expensive than what people had before. The deductibles are much higher. It is just an absolute windfall, trillions in dollars of profits to the health insurance companies, and of course the government gets their piece of the action, estimated to be $200 billion a year in brand new tax revenues that this government needs to dangle before new lenders. See, we can make the payments on the interest with the Obamacare tax windfall. Even some liberal bloggers are now coming out and saying this is just not working. They're complaining about the fact that their health insurance rates have virtually doubled. So it's just absolute nonsense. We're seeing another report over here in the Examiner about how one of the provisions of Obamacare is the government will be allowed to come into your home for inspections without warrant, without probable cause, just government agents coming on in, and they have a whole list of categories of homes where the government will be allowed to come in and do inspections anytime they feel like. If the mother in the household is less than 21 years of age, if there's somebody who's a tobacco user in the house, students are underachieving at school, and get this one, families with individuals who are serving or formerly served in the armed forces will be subject to spot unannounced inspections under Obamacare. Complete violation of the Fourth Amendment. A lot of people are complaining that under Obamacare, they're no longer going to be able to go to their own favorite doctor. They found a doctor they like. They want to keep on going. Oh, no, no, no. Under Obamacare, we will tell you what doctor you go to, what treatment you will have. All right, I've talked about Obamacare enough here. And I want to get on to global warming because they're back. Al Gore is back. We must put a price on carbon. They're out there. And apparently the head of the UN climate body, Christiana Figueres, on the BBC, broke down in tears about how we're destroying the world if we don't get a carbon tax. I mean, the carbon Nazis are getting desperate if they're down to using a crying woman to try and sell the scheme. But it's another cash grab. All of these nations in the West that are enslaved to these private central banks issuing the public currencies alone at interest are drowning in debt, and none of them have the gonadal tissue to stand up and say the system itself is flawed. Oh, no, no, we've got to get more money out of the people. Well, the people are out of money because the jobs all went away to other countries. Everybody in Washington, D.C. and Wall Street is so focused on taking more money away from you, and nobody was thinking about how to rebuild the economy, how to rebuild manufacturing and agriculture so Americans could transform their labor into money to pay all those new demands. And that's why this nation is collapsing. Nobody maintained the overview of what was best for the nation as a whole. Everybody's just dealing with their little immediate agenda, taking care of their donors, their backers, their supporters. They're all running around in 5,000 directions. And nobody was keeping that overview, which is first and foremost supposed to be the function of that central federal government to arbitrate between the needs of the state, between what is good for the nation, between the greed of the money junkies. And they dropped the ball. Absolutely, completely dropped the ball. We got to take a commercial break. I'm going to try and sort out my mic problems while we're gone, and we will be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show, and I think I sound a little more like my normal self here, but it looks like I'm going to have to buy a new headset. Well, I've only been wearing this one for how many years? Alrighty, getting back to the news and the economy here. We've been talking about J.P. Morgan and how they're screaming and crying about how the U.S. government is stealing a $13 billion fine from them, and they're anti-capitalist, and it's just punishment for Jamie Dimon saying bad things. And the reality is very simply that J.P. Morgan is laughing all the way to the bank because they stole trillions of dollars in this mortgage-backed security fraud. 2 million American families lost their homes to this financial manipulation. And I don't think that J.P. Morgan got half the kicking around they deserved, to be very honest about that. Alrighty, so let's see. Moving on a little bit here. The jobs report finally came out. As you're probably aware, the jobs report for September was delayed because of the government shutdown and sequestration. Non-farm payrolls fell some 40,000 jobs short of what was being forecast. And so it's a very dismal jobs report. And we kind of knew already that was going to happen because some of the payroll companies across the country were saying that their business was in decline. Now, a lot of people are very alarmed because the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program benefits will end the 1st of November. It's probably going to work out to be about $29 a month, which may not sound like a lot of money. But having worked with a lot of these food-challenged people myself, $29 is a lot of money to these people. And, of course, the U.S. government's sending more money to Pakistan. They're getting ready to spend more money on wars. But for you, the American people, sorry, you are absolutely at the bottom of the heap here. The United States, especially, and it's going to get worse before the end of the year with the debt ceiling being waived. The U.S. has gone in another $1 trillion into debt just this year alone. They can't get it under control. They absolutely cannot get it under control. And the rest of the world is beginning to realize the dollar is not reliable as a reserve currency anymore. It could collapse at any minute, and all those bank accounts that are denominated in U.S. dollars could be worthless overnight. They're all starting to move away from it. There's no turning this thing around. The only thing that would stop this from happening is for the U.S. government to shut down that Federal Reserve and say all dollars in circulation are now issued by the government and they do not accrue interest any longer. Start rebuilding the economy. Even that might not work. I think we're too far gone. I've been working for 20 years to try and get this government to turn back from this abyss, but they don't listen to me for some strange reason here. Now, the IRS scandal is back in the news, and apparently there are some new lawsuits coming in about it. Lou Dobbs was reporting that the lawsuit regarding IRS targeting of political dissidents is ramping up. And apparently a trail is surfacing saying that, yes, indeed, this goes all the way to Barack Obama himself. Now, remember, one of the articles of impeachment against Richard Milhouse Nixon was using the IRS as a weapon against political enemies. So we're already in impeachment territory. And I would love to see Obama get his perp walk or get the old heave-ho. But we know that the current Congress lacks the spine to do their job. So it's probably not going to happen. But we, the people, need to understand this is what's been going on. And we need to be angry about it. We absolutely do. Now, getting on to other crimes committed by his Obama-ness here, Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International have both issued scathing reports on U.S. drone strikes, calling them war crimes, and they absolutely are. The Amnesty report contradicts the U.S. claims of precision. We're only getting bad guys. How do you know that was a bad guy? It's just a blood splotch. Well, it's a blood splotch. He must have been a bad guy. We don't make mistakes. And Amnesty is saying at least 29 of the targeted individuals for the drone strikes since 2012 appear to have been non-combatants. They weren't terrorists. They weren't actively engaged in conflict with the United States of America. But the NSA just pulled their names out of everybody's contact list and Facebook likes and whatever and just started bombing away. Over in Yemen, there's concern about the large number of civilians being killed by these drone strikes. A clear violation of international law. Human Rights Watch issued a 102-page report between a drone and Al-Qaeda saying that the drone strikes are not accomplishing any legitimate military objectives and they're causing disproportionate civilian deaths. We're seeing another story coming out from RINF.com basically confirming that the U.S. war on terror is increasing the threat of terror to the United States of America. Because when you go on out into other people's countries and you drop high explosives on them and their loved ones, they're not going to remain entirely cheerful about the United States. And I think it may be deliberate. I think the goal of the government is to go out and blow up a bunch of people and get everybody in the world angry with us, so all of a sudden the door is open for us to say, we must declare war on all those Arab Muslims there in order to preserve our safety and whatever else it is they're going to be saying. Meanwhile, over in the airports, the TSA has decided that in addition to grabbing your crotch and going through your luggage and stealing your iPhones and dropping your laptops, that they now need to have access to all of these background databases the NSA has been collecting. So that as you go through the process to get on an airplane, along with getting groped and skin cancer and all the rest of that, they're going to have a little computer terminal that will search through this wide array of government and private databases that include things like car registrations and your employment information. I mean, this is getting completely ridiculous. I think most people, if they're honest with themselves, would realize that at some point in their past, they probably did something that doesn't look too good. We all make mistakes. And we all have to be tolerant of other people's mistakes. We have to have a little understanding that things happen, especially in a society with so many laws that it's virtually impossible to live your life without being in violation of something at some point. But this whole idea of all these computers so that only people with pristine past records are allowed to travel or to rise to corporate leadership or political leadership, we're creating a hideously intolerant society, a society with no redemption, ruled by people who are, in the computer systems, never done anything wrong. Not because they're inherently good, but because they got lucky. They're the far end of a probability spectrum. And I'm sure they'll convince themselves that they deserve their positions of leadership because they have no blemish on their record. And as a result, they'll be very intolerant of people with blemishes on their records. They're not going to represent real people who do make mistakes, who do reform their lives and are deserving of a little tolerance and forgiveness. And this is just going to further cripple the American tourist agency, flight, aviation industry. People are just going to stop traveling. And maybe that's another part of this war economy they don't want to talk about. Remember back in World War II, they had signs on all the train and bus stations, is this trip really necessary? They wanted Americans to stop traveling so the resources could be diverted to the war effort. We're seeing a repeat of it in kind of a clandestine little way. You know, do you really need to travel, or is it important enough to get crotch groped and scanned and have your entire past on display to a total stranger at the computer? Boy, it's just getting really ugly out there. All right, we're going to be back here talking about some news about Israel. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're working on our audio problems. Actually, I'm going to write a letter to Santa Claus. We're coming up on Christmas here, and I've been a good boy this year, and I need a new headset, a new mixer, a new divider, I need new cables. I need all new stuff here. This is just, it all acts like it's made out of compressed rust, you know, especially in this Hawaiian climate with the salt air blowing in and the rest of it. It's consumer grade. It's not pro grade, except for the headset, and that was expensive. Alrighty, getting back off of my personal problems, technological problems, and back to the news here. Apparently, there is a story being reported in the Middle Eastern press that Israeli armed forces have crossed into Lebanon. And apparently it was at least 15, could have been more, and they crossed into Lebanese territory in blatant violation of a United Nations Security Council resolution. And the troops just crossed into the border. They had dogs with them. They claim they're just searching the area, which they're not allowed to do. It's not their area. And they entered a village, Et Haroun village, which is about 125 kilometers from Beirut. Now, I know what Israel is doing. They're going to start doing these little incursions until Lebanon or Hezbollah reacts and says, you're not supposed to do that. And Israel's going to, what did we do? They're trying to goad an action that they can use to justify going back into Lebanon militarily, because They failed to get access to the Litani River, which was the main goal of their previous invasion of Lebanon. So this is how Israel likes to start wars. They'll do a little something, do a little something, do a little something, till they get a reaction, denounce the reaction as the initiating event in the war, and go forward from there. And I'll give you a really good example from 2008. On Election Day 2008, Israel violated a 6-month ceasefire that they had had with Hamas, and they launched an airstrike into Gaza that killed several Hamas officials. And the next day, what was left of Hamas came out and said, well, I guess the ceasefire's over. And Israel said, aha, Hamas says the ceasefire is over. And they launched Operation Cast Lead. So this is the way Israel likes to play these games. And obviously the American media is not reporting that Israeli armed forces crossed the border into Lebanon, went into a Lebanese town. Look at us, we're Israelis, we have guns, we have dogs. You know, be sure and tell Hezbollah about that. So, plus, if you look at all of a sudden, once again, the channels on the cable box are being flooded with Holocaust and Hitler and Nazis. And they've got a new movie coming out, The Monument Men, about the brave soldiers who went in to, you know, find the coolest looking buildings in Nazi Germany or something. And they're really scraping the bottom of the barrel to try and revive the brand of Nazis and Holocaust and everything, which, let's be honest, it all happened before the vast majority of us were even born. And they're trying as hard as they can to just keep that whole meme alive so Israel can use it for political cover. We're going to grab a phone call here. Fred in Michigan. Aloha, Fred. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Oh, man. Now that you bring up Zionist Israel, what's the guy's name? Benji Netanyahu?
Netanyahu.
Yeah, he originated as a furniture salesman, by the way.
Well, Richard Nixon began as a car salesman. I'm not sure that necessarily, you know, is a bad thing. I mean, the current head of the UN's IPCC used to be a railroad engineer.
Oh, well, hey, that's better than all the rest.
Hey, we all work our way up, you know.
Yeah. Well, real quick, not the reason that I called, however, but since you brought up what's going on in Lebanon, you mentioned the Litani River. Yeah, they've had a number of incursions to secure the Litani River. In fact, I was just reviewing Andrew Tarrington Hitchcock's The Synagogue of Satan book, and he's describing the Star of David. And it has a blue border at the top and the bottom representing the Nile and Euphrates
That's
rivers.
the Israeli flag, yes. Because the Israeli flag is basically the image of the traditional Jewish prayer shawl, and that's what the two lines represent for biblical reasons.
And coincidental to that, it also represents the inclusion into their biblical borders represented by the Nile and Euphrates, Iraq, Syria, Jordan, Lebanon, and Saudi Arabia. That's what constitutes the biblical Israel.
Or what they call Eretz Israel, or Greater Israel, you know, because their imaginary playmate in the sky told them that's what they're supposed to have.
Yeah, and then he goes on, Hitchcock, speaking of that, he says, he identifies Moloch. This is all part of the hexagram. The Star of David is actually a hexagram that goes way back in esoteric religion.
Well, it's the Seal of Solomon.
Yeah, right.
Okay.
Right. Okay, so, but, you know, then it represents Saturn's Day and the Jewish Sabbath day being Saturday or Saturn's Day.
Mm-hmm.
It's pretty astonishing how all this is about. But Netanyahu said, I was looking for the exact quote, recently he quoted that Lebanon is a cancer that must be terminated.
Oh, I wouldn't take it personal. Netanyahu says that about everywhere.
Yeah.
Iran's a cancer, Iraq's a cancer, Lebanon's, Syria's a cancer. Ah, cancer here, cancer there, cancer everywhere. Yeah. Lebanon shouldn't take it personally.
Prior to 9/11/01, it was on the Sean Insanity program that I just serendipitously tuned into on the radio. And what I heard Netanyahu say, which smacked me right in the face. And he said it in such a belligerent, authoritarian manner. He said, if the American people do not take seriously terrorism in the Middle East, it's going to come home to haunt America. And this is like less than a year before 9/11.
Yeah, they were telegraphing it, and he's back to saying that again here. I mean, Israel lives by the false flag attack. We know that Abu Nidal, who was held aloft as this main Palestinian terrorist for so many years, was actually working for Israeli intelligence. Even his own people said he just seemed to always carry out actions that harmed Palestine and helped Israel. We know about the Lavon affair. We know about the attack on the USS Liberty. We know that Israel was very much involved in 9/11. Israel's a little tiny country, and they don't want to risk their own precious children in these wars, so they go out and play these dirty tricks to get other countries to fight each other and to fight Israel's enemies. Viktor Ostrovsky, in his book By Way of Deception, reveals how Israel planted a Trojan horse radio transmitter in Tripoli, sending out completely bogus messages that Gaddafi was getting ready to launch terror attacks across the world that tricked Ronald Reagan into bombing Libya. And they literally tried to target Gaddafi. They missed him. They got his 5-year-old daughter.
And you know what else? Viktor Ostrovsky appeared on a Canadian, I think it was called Canada AM or something like that, back in early 90s, was it?
Yes.
Because he authored not only By Way of Deception, but The Other Side of Deception was the other. So anyway, he was being interviewed, and some guy from Israel calls in by the name of Lapid, and Lapid put out a kill order on the program that some brave, righteous Israeli in Canada should do us the big favor of killing Viktor Ostrovsky. But then he retracted that and said, "Oh no, that would create a diplomatic incident."
Well, more than that, it would call a lot of attention. I mean, when you go and you assassinate somebody, all of a sudden the world wakes up and says, what was that person talking about? And maybe I should go pay attention. And so generally, once somebody's already gone public with a story, is not a good time to assassinate them. You want to get to them before they go public. Once they've gone public, all assassinating does is call more attention to what they've already said. So,
Mike, before I forget,
yeah,
I got to leave you with this. The Bank of Hawaii, according to Karen Udis and her website, I wish you would interview her sometime. It would be totally stellar. KAHUDES.
I know who she is, and I know what she's saying about the Bank of Hawaii, and I've made some calls around here for some people I know in the banking, and they're saying no. I mean, there's a little gold bullion here and there, but this idea, I mean, the volume of gold she's talking about is pretty much all that there is in the entire world, according to some estimates. I already took this claim apart on my website a couple of weeks ago, and I don't know why she's saying it. First of all, if there was that volume of gold here in Hawaii, we'd be invaded by now. So I don't know where she's coming from, but it doesn't check out and it doesn't make any sense. Okay?
At least you have a gold rush going on there, wouldn't you?
Well, everybody here in the Hawaii is very fond of gold, and there's a lot of physical out here, but not the volume she's talking about. We got to take a break for commercials. We will be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show today. And we're going to go right to the phones. Art off the grid. Aloha, Art. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. In regards to what that last caller was talking about when it comes to Lebanon, rather than having to try to take, 5 minutes or 10 minutes to try to say what I want to say, we'll keep this first part. It's a very simple yes or no question, and then I'll make my point. So yes, no question, does not need elaboration. Lebanon is a country, yes or no?
Yes.
Okay. Now, we had Netanyahu and a bunch of other morons out there whining and complaining. Well, Ahmadinejad said Israel needed to be wiped off the map. Hold the boat, time out, take a breath, come up for air. Ahmadinejad never said, Benny boy, that Israel needed to be wiped off the map.
No, it was a deliberate mistranslation coming out of memory.
He was referring to the Zionist. He was talking about Zionism, which is a political ideology. that Zionism needed to be removed.
He didn't even use that word. What he said was that Zionism would pass from the pages of history, or would pass into history, which is a very passive observation, rather than a call for actual hostile intent. But we have all these organizations like Memory that are taking what is said in the Arab media, and they will translate it with a bias and give it to the American media, who will then regurgitate it to the American people. And it's always translated to portray the Arab nations in the worst possible light and Israel in the best possible light.
Okay, and this is why it always takes me so long to get my point out, because I get interrupted. Basically, he was talking about Zionism going bye-bye.
Yes.
But yet Netanyahu and all these others wanted to get out there and claim he said Israel needed to be wiped off the face of the map. Wait a minute, Benny boy. He never said that. He was talking about the passing of Zionism. But yet, if this is true, I did not hear Benjamin Netanyahu say this, but if this is true, did he not just call for the complete genocide of Lebanon?
Yeah, in a way, but, Israel will say things like that and nobody ever calls them on it. Israel has said that, Iran ought to be wiped off the map, and certainly looking at the maps, it's obvious Israel is trying to wipe Palestine off the map. The presentation, the bias in the presentation by the American corporate media is very, very obvious. That when Israel grabs pieces of other people's land, that's okay because they suffered so much in World War II. And when other nations are saying, hey, please stop grabbing pieces of my land, oh, they're being anti-Semites. They don't recognize that Israel needs security and buffer zones and the rest of it. We heard all that during the whole Golan Heights situation, where Israel grabbed the Golan Heights saying they needed it to protect themselves from Syria, even though it was Israel that had been doing the attacking.
Well, here's the thing. If Ahmadinejad or anybody else, for that matter, they cannot even reference the passing of an ideology or a concept or whatever without being accused of having genocidal tendencies, but Netanyahu can talk about eliminating an entire country, and it's okay.
That's
really?
Exactly right. That's exactly the extent of the bias that we're seeing. Our genocides are good and their genocides are bad. And there is no question, Israel and much of the corporate media are still operating in that model that, from the 1950s and 1960s, where they can just say whatever they want. It doesn't even have to make sense, and the American people will just believe it. But those days are gone, which is why people like you are calling into shows like this one here on Republic Broadcasting and calling them on the very obvious spin and bias and deception. And unfortunately, people like Netanyahu are just unable to adjust and adapt to the new reality of the 21st century and a skeptical, globally connected population.
I'll tell you, Mike, let somebody try calling into like the Washington Journal or something like that on C-SPAN, or calling any of these. Here's a great one. Call Alan Combs' show and try bringing up and see what happens to you. Hey, thanks, Mike.
All right, we're going to let you go and switch over to Adam in South Korea. Aloha, Adam. Thank you for holding. What's on your mind?
Hi, yes. The government of South Korea has a constitution that allows the politicians are held liable for their actions. In the United States, politicians are not held liable for insider trading or other things. The South Korean constitution, you could sue the politician or go after them if they hurt you personally. Now, that's not in our constitution, and plus... It ought to be.
It ought to be. But the reasoning there, and I'm going to slow you down a little bit because you've had too much coffee this morning. The reason is because when the United States was set up, it was a presumption of the society that everybody in the country, up to and including the president, had to obey the common law. And what has come down is that members of Congress and the president and various other officials are now at least de facto treated as if the laws do not apply to them. But you're absolutely right. South Korea's got the right idea. There should be additional laws on people in the government to make sure they comply with the Constitution and the policies of the nation, and that's something to consider for the blueprint for the new America.
Also, the other thing, we're talking about the modern weaponry. The United States is trying to arm everybody and allies with the F-35 with Joint Strike Fighters. Your F-35 Joint Strike Fighters are not even adequate against Russian fires in close range. The Russian fires are more maneuverable, much better than thrust vectoring. The Russian The F-35 can't compete with any Russian firing close-range visual.
The Pentagon has actually discussed ending the program. It's the single most costly weapons program in U.S. history, and it's produced a piece of junk, not unlike Obamacare.
The only aircraft that compete against Russian aircraft in close range is F-22 that they're telling us about. F-22 is the only aircraft that thrust vector is maneuverable enough.
Yeah, but the problem with the F-22 is it is now ceiling limited because they still can't find the reason why it's asphyxiating its pilots after 4 years. And so all a Russian fighter has to do to gain tactical supremacy is simply go above that ceiling and shoot down. And, you know, American weapon systems are hideously expensive and they're just not that effective. The Russians are spending far less, but they're spending it wisely, and they're getting far more bang for their buck, so to speak, here. I'm going to let you go here because we've got one more phone call I want to get to before the top of the hour, and that's Anthony in New York. Aloha, Anthony. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi. I was just going to mention the healthcare sector. I just signed up for my healthcare for next year for my company, and I'm paying an extra $20 a week for basically the same healthcare, which is equivalent to them taking my income tax check for year 2014, it looks like.
Well, you're one of the lucky ones because we're getting a lot of reports from people whose health insurance premiums are effectively being doubled by Obamacare, and they're also being hit with these sky-high deductibles, which means the vast majority of Americans who are paying for these new health insurance policies will never actually use those policies because they're never going to come up to the deductible in an average year of medical expense. The health insurance is only going to be called on in the event of an absolute major disastrous medical emergency.
Well, I estimated it. I was paying about $33 a week before, and now it's like $54 a week. So it's
so you're talking about another $80, $90 a month is what your premiums have gone up.
Yeah, I guess 65%.
Okay.
Something like that.
Yeah, that sounds a lot closer to what we're hearing from other people. Okay?
Okay, thank you.
All right, now, before top of the hour here, apparently down in Venezuela, they shot down what they're calling 2 hostile planes. Now, they're civilian aircraft accused drug smugglers. Venezuela has now adopted a policy of shooting down any suspected drug airplane that refuses an order to land. And this, of course, is another reason why the U.S. is going to start being very unhappy with Venezuela, because a lot of that drug trafficking still to this very day involves the Central Intelligence Agency. So that situation is starting to escalate. Real quick story. Last week we were seeing all these stories in the corporate media attempting to reinforce the official legend of the Warren Report regarding John F. Kennedy. Apparently they fell on deaf ears. So now we're seeing a whole new tactic. They're coming out with stories saying, oh, the assassins were here, they were there, they're Cubans, and they're trying to lay all these false trails to hide the connection between the Kennedy assassination and Israel, CIA, and Executive Order 11110 and the Federal Reserve. We'll be back after Phyllis Schlafly and some commercials. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here, hour number 2. And I want to basically go back and touch on the subject I was mentioning before the break. Last week we were starting to see this flood of stories and new books and everything to support the Warren Commission and say, oh, yes, it was Lee Harvey Oswald, Crazy that assassin. Don't you dare listen to anybody who questions the official story. They're all wackos and kooks. And the reality is polls show that the vast majority of Americans do not believe the Warren Report, do not believe the official story, and obviously with more recent examples of government deception fresh in their memory, more Americans are looking back at the Kennedy assassination and realizing the sheer bogusness of some of what was being said, like the magic bullet theory. So this week, we're all of a sudden seeing these news stories come out, and this one was in Philly.com, where they're getting confessions from people who helped kill John F. Kennedy, and this particular one is supposed to be a Cuban hitman, Herminio Diaz, who claims he fired the shot from the grassy knoll. And I find this rather interesting because it appears the original plan for the Kennedy assassination was to frame Cuba for it in order to anger America into supporting a new invasion of Cuba. And this was the reason they had these other Oswalds who didn't even look like the guy going down to Mexico City trying to get going to the Cuban embassy, trying to get permission to visit Cuba and come back to lay a trail saying, oh, Lee Harvey Oswald came from Cuba on orders from Castro to kill our president in order to get a new invasion going. That's the reason they planted that lousy rifle, the Mannlicher Carcano, on him. And even the Warren report confirms the scope on that rifle had a manufacturing defect where the crosshairs on the reticle could not even be lined up on where the bullet was going to land. So it was impossible to aim. And people have often asked, why didn't they plant a more credible assassin's weapon on him, like a Mauser? Well, the reason is, at that time, Castro was importing Mannlicher Carcanos from Italy by the boatload to hand out to the Cuban people in case the U.S. ever did invade again. Here we have Castro, the evil dictator, and he's giving guns to his people, as opposed to America, the home of the free, and they're trying to take our guns away from us. That ought to tell you something about what's really going on in the world. But that was the reason they wanted to put that Mannlicher Carcano on him. Now, Lyndon Johnson was privy to the deal that John F. Kennedy had made with Khrushchev over the Cuban Missile Crisis, where Khrushchev agreed to remove the missiles from Cuba as long as Kennedy understood any new invasion of Cuba would immediately trigger an attack by Russia. That was the deal. And Johnson knew that. So Johnson basically rewrote the story of the assassination to where Lee Harvey Oswald was this crazed lone nut assassin, and he bought off the military-industrial complex by giving them Vietnam to play around in, and basically held off World War III at that particular point. But we're going to see a lot of stories coming out there trying to muddy the waters. Now, John F. Kennedy did make a lot of enemies. He angered the Texas oil billionaires with the oil depletion allowance issue. He angered the mafia, which had helped Kennedy steal the election, let's be honest about it, and then Kennedy turned around and sicked his brother, Robert Kennedy, as Attorney General onto organized crime. Kennedy had angered the CIA by pulling the plug on the Bay of Pigs invasion. Kennedy had angered Israel by absolutely opposing their getting nuclear weapons. And above that, John F. Kennedy had angered the Federal Reserve System with his Executive Order 11110, which ordered the U.S. Treasury to start issuing a new value-based currency, the United States note, based on the silver held in reserve at Fort Knox. And they put about $4.5 billion into circulation. And back then in the 60s, that was a lot of cash. And that was cash that was circulating through commerce without accruing interest to the Federal Reserve. And 5 months after signing Executive Order 11110, John F. Kennedy was killed in Dallas, Texas. And on the Warren Commission sat John J. McCloy, president of the Chase Manhattan Bank, president of the World Bank, and I don't care how good a banker he is not qualified to be investigating the murder of a president. So he was on the Warren Commission to make sure that the financial dimensions of the assassination were never made public. We're going to take a phone call here. Jim in Illinois. Aloha, Jim. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. Good to hear your voice. Thanks for being a caring American. Anyway, I'm talking about Democrats and Republicans. And both of those people fall on the political line far on the left of where I'm at, which is a true Republican or constitutionalist.
A paleocon. I call them paleocons, and I'm one myself.
You know, okay, that'll work. But anyway, I was listening to a show earlier this morning on RBN, and a guy called in. They were building up Ted Cruz about being such this great fellow and that, you know, blah, blah, blah. And look, man, that guy is a shill, you know. And poor guy who called in, he was being righteous, and they ganged up on him, the guest and the host of the show. And I didn't get a chance to get in there. I just was left hanging on the telephone. But anyway, you know, Cruz got that 21-hour filibuster, and, you know, it was nothing more than show for his narcissistic self.
Well, it's also for next year's elections. I mean, everybody is already playing on this, looking forward to the elections a year from now, and they're pointing fingers at each other, and especially the Democrats now realizing that this Obamacare software system is an absolute disaster and may take Obamacare down with it. They're working as hard as they can to categorize the Russians as the bad guys, the Republicans as the bad guys. I'm thinking too many thoughts at the same time. The Republicans are saying it's the Democrats for pushing this bad position, and that's a valid comment at this point because, like I keep saying, the wise and prudent choice to make would have been to go along with the House deal to raise the debt ceiling but delay Obamacare for 1 year while they get the problems out. Now the Democrats are looking like they're pushing this thing out of ego and a cash grab, and they're trying to demonize the Republicans, but the polls, at least the polls that are being taken out here in the independent media are absolutely opposed to Obamacare, and they're very much applauding the Republicans for trying to take a stand on this issue, on this one government program that really does need to be shoved in the Al-Qaeda. We're seeing the corporate media trying to bias the polls the other way, but we ran a poll on our website this morning. Should Obamacare be defunded? And it was over 90% said yes, it has to be shut down. It's not going to work. It's raising health care costs for Americans. The computer system doesn't work. It's wide open to hacking by cyber criminals. There is nothing good about this program at all.
Yeah. Let's not forget, as soon as he did that filibuster, he voted along with the Democrat party line right after that, And anybody who votes for a Democrat or a Republican at this point in time in our history has got to be softer than a sneaker full of whatever that...
Well, he's a professional politician, and I would speculate that he's angling to maybe go for a vice presidential nomination in 2016.
Oh, Jesus Christ, man.
Well,
this,
obviously he got himself a lot of press on that. We're going to let you go here. Go grab a...
Yeah, thanks a lot, Mike. You have a good day.
All right, same to you. Switch over to Kyle in Philadelphia. Aloha, Kyle. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. Well, I wanted to start off real quick by saying that article you were relating to on the Kennedy assassination from Philly.com. I would take anything you see on there with a grain of salt. Philly.com is the online version of the Philadelphia Inquirer, which is not to be trusted at all whatsoever.
Mm-hmm.
But I wanted, hearing the conversation that you were just having with the previous caller, I wanted to piggyback on that. I see a lot of people falling back into same old trap of, well, if you're against Obamacare, then somehow you are with the Republicans.
Mm-hmm.
You are. It's a choice. They're being.
It's a false dichotomy. It's a false dichotomy. Kyle, we got to take a break for commercials here. Do not hang up. I'm going to come back to you after these words from our sponsors. I want you to pick up right where you left off. We'll be back after these commercials. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. We're going to go back to the phones. Kyle in Philadelphia. And Kyle, just pick up where you left off.
Yeah, like I was saying, there seems to be this idea that to disagree with somebody, you must agree with somebody else. So if you disagree with Obama, then you somehow have to agree with Ted Cruz or the Republicans. And the ultimate freedom in this world is the freedom to say no. And I say no to the Republicans, and I say no to the Democrats.
I agree.
Now, there's some issues that I will fall on the same, side with them with, but overall, I would say I disagree with both of them. And it's not until we are able to hold the line and say, no, we are not going to bend our decisions to you. You are going to, bend your ideals to us, or we are going to put somebody in there who does. I mean,
well, that's the way it's supposed to work here, and along with this idea that, you're either with us or you're with the other party, goes along with another, that if you are a member of a party, you're supposed to accept and support all their ideas without question. I decide everything on issue-by-issue basis, and the First Amendment gives every American a right to stand up and tell both parties, you are wrong, and you are absolutely wrong, and you're not doing your job if you go on being wrong here. I've been studying the Republicans and the Democrats for a lot of years, and right now, anarchy's looking very attractive.
Absolutely. I mean, I wouldn't even say, I listen to you every day, Mike. I'm a big fan of yours, but there are certain issues that I don't agree with you on. It doesn't make either one of us right or either one of us wrong.
Mm-hmm.
But I have a feeling and I have a sense that you and I are both want the same thing. When I look at these politicians, be that Republican or Democrat, even if I agree with them on certain issues, I don't have the feeling that they want what I want. I have a feeling that they want is what is best for them. And
there's no question. It sort of comes with the territory. The curse of political power is it attracts the very sort of people who shouldn't have it, and that was the reason why this nation was set up with a deliberately weakened central government to avoid these kinds of problems. Kyle, I'm going to let you go. The phone lines are loading up. We're going to switch over to Tate in Michigan. Aloha, Tate. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind? Tate, are you there? Okay, I guess we lost Tate. Can we switch over to Alex in Texas? Alex, are you there? Okay, we seem to be having some problem with our phone systems because I'm not getting anything coming.
Hello?
Hello. Is this Alex or Tate?
This is Alex, sir, here in Texas.
Okay, what's on your mind?
Actually, I was
Okay, we've got a bad phone line. You're breaking up. Try one more time, please.
Can you hear me better now?
I can hear you better now.
Okay, yesterday I was reading something about Karen Hughes from the IMF, and I was wondering, do you know this lady's background at all? Do you know where she's coming from with the allegations that there's more gold in no?
Okay, you're breaking up again. I'm sorry. We're going to have to let you go. We're going to have to let you go. Again, as I told that earlier caller, the story about a massive stockpile of gold here in Hawaii does not check out. There's a little gold here. There's a little gold bullion. A lot of people own gold. Gold jewelry is very, very big here in the Hawaiian Islands. But the amount of gold that is alleged to be hidden in the Bank of Hawaii is almost the entire global supply. So the story just isn't really making a lot of sense here. All right, Tate in Michigan is back. Aloha, Tate. Welcome back to the show. What's on your mind? Okay, we seem to have some real issues with our phone system today. So I'm going to go back and do some news story while they feed the hamster in the little wire wheel behind there. Now, we all know that identity theft is a major problem. We know that one of the major concerns about the Obamacare sign-up software system is that it is wide open to hacking and abuse. We know there are fraudsters and scammers already going out calling people and saying, I'm an official Obamacare navigator and I will help you sign up if you will just tell me over the phone all the information that we need, which includes your bank account information, social security number, and so forth. And we're all on guard to protect our identity. The more we get plugged into this global plastic computerized network, the more vulnerable we are. It's a good reason to start delinking, go back to a cash-only life. Now we've got this very bizarre story, this coming out of techdirt.com, how Experian sold their customer data to an ID theft service. This ID theft service set up a phony business front pretending to do some kind of business research, went to Experian and said, we'd like to buy your database of customer data, and Experian sold it to them. What were they thinking? They didn't check out this company to make sure this company could be trusted with this information. They were apparently getting paid through money orders from Singapore. That should have raised a few red flags. Just amazing stuff. Now, we talked about this last week, but I'm going to mention it again. There is a new piece of malware just flying all over the globe right now, and it's called CryptoLocker. And if it infects your machine, it cryptographically locks your hard drive so you cannot use your own files. Then you're presented with a message that you have to send $300 in Bitcoins to some remote Bitcoin exchange, and you have only 100 hours to do it, or your hard drives will be formatted. It's blackmail. It's absolute blackmail. And personally, I'm of the opinion that if they were to catch just one computer criminal and crucify him or her on national television upside down, so it takes about 2 weeks for them to die, much of this cybercrime problem would go away. Now, that being said, there's a positive side to this story. The mere presence of this criminal, this CryptoLocker operation, continuing across the globe without any apparent restraint, proves that the mighty National Security Agency has wasted all those billions of dollars on this system to surveil the Internet. Now, we know they lied about thwarting terror attacks with their system, and they certainly failed to do so in Boston. But if they are unable to track down this criminal, and apparently they can't do it, it proves the entire system is totally useless. It's a waste of taxpayer money. It should be dismantled and sold for surplus to help balance the federal budget. Now, maybe the NSA hired the same software company that did the Obamacare system to set up this surveillance, PRISM, the rest of it. And if so, it would explain why computer criminals so easily seem to evade them, and why we were able to defeat them with our 3 NSA challenges. But every time there's another computer crime out there on an internet which we are being told the NSA has totally saturated and surveilled, certainly within the United States of America, it reminds us the system doesn't actually work. It's another government boondoggle. Billions and billions of dollars, and yes, they can use it to spy on ordinary law-abiding American citizens, but obviously it's completely ineffective against criminals, terrorists, Wall Street bankers, anybody with the resources to create their own encryption and otherwise evade the NSA. It's not set up to go after criminals. It's there to keep an eye on you, to steal your business secrets, not just here in the U.S., but France, Mexico. The U.S. is suffering a huge diplomatic disaster because of revelations about NSA spying on all the other countries for corporate intelligence. It's corporate espionage. It's got nothing to do with national security or the war on terror. They're stealing business secrets. We'll be back after these commercials. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're going to go back to the phones here. Joe in Pennsylvania. Aloha, Joe. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, hi, Mike. I have read the book Crossfire, the Plot That Killed Kennedy by Jim Marrs some time ago.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that I found interesting in there is, I wanted your opinion on it, maybe anything you can add to it. They said that the majority of the shots seemed to have come, or there was evidence that said that they had come from over these highway overpasses. And also, there's some other information I got. I don't know whether it was from that book or not. Or there was a video out or a photograph, I think it was, of the Secret Service men were told to stand down from Kennedy's limousine.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we've had that video on our website a couple of times where the limousine is departing Air Force One at the airport. The bubble top has been removed, and some of the Secret Service agents who would have been riding on Kennedy's limousine itself in those rear positions where they've got the handrails and the little platform for the feet were waved off by their supervisor, and one of the Secret Service agents is like throwing his hands up in the air. What are you doing? So, yeah, it was pretty obvious.
Yeah, that's the one I'm talking about. But they said, what was it, like as many as 17 shots fired, the evidence indicated from pictures of the limousine and everything?
No, the conclusion from the analysis done by the House Select Committee on Assassinations is there was a minimum of 7 shots owing to budgetary restrictions. They say other sounds on that police dictabelt tape were not analyzed to determine if they were gunshots or not. But it looks like there was one shooter somewhere over by the Daltex building that fired the first shot to get everybody looking the wrong way. That's the shot that missed Kennedy completely, and it hit James Tague down by the triple overpass. There was one shooter in the school book depository in order to make it look like Kennedy was being shot from the book depository. And then there was another shoot team down by the grassy knoll behind the fence there. Having shooters at the triple overpass would have put them in the line of the fire from the shooter at the Daltex building, and in any event, that was really too far away from the kill box, I think, to be practical. And there's a lot of stories out there trying to keep the issue confused, like there was somebody down in the storm drain and the rest of it. But very obviously that fatal headshot did come from the grassy knoll area.
Okay, yeah. A lot of the information I got about the amount of shots and stuff, that came from like stuff that was recently posted. And I don't know if you're familiar with a book that was written by Richard E. Sprague. It was called The Taking of America. I just posted the link up on your Facebook page. I don't know if you're familiar with that book or not. It's freely available, and what you thought of it.
Well, there is no question that with Kennedy's assassination, the course of the nation changed dramatically. The United States notes were pulled from circulation and pretty much all destroyed. Johnson had to buy off the military-industrial complex from invading Cuba by letting them play in Vietnam. And even Jim Garrison was saying this really was a coup d'etat taking place in the United States of America.
Well, as far as my political convictions, I'm a political atheist. That's where I stand. I don't believe in any of it. It's just, you know.
Well, I'm definitely a political heretic, I'd say, but I like your term, political atheist. Yeah, because government runs like a religion. They demand that we believe what they pronounce from on high, that we believe the official story, that we believe this is the way life is supposed to be and it couldn't ever possibly be any better. And it's a lot worse in other countries, so don't you even think of leaving, which is definitely not true. I got to see a lot of that firsthand myself. Anything else?
No, I'd say you sound like a real preacher. You got your act together.
Thank you, I think, and we're going to switch over to Malcolm in Texas. Right. Aloha, Malcolm. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Mike. No doubt the Federal Reserve had a real big part in Kennedy's assassination. Anyway...
They certainly had motive.
Yeah. Anyway, I sent you an email. An economist, Lacey Hunt out of Dallas, he just put out a paper about the Federal Reserve, one of the Federal Reserve's indicators, not to change the subject or anything, but anyway, one of the Federal Reserve's indicators I remembered a long time ago we used to study in the 1980s when I was wore a different hat. It was called the Large-Scale Asset Purchases Index. In the 80s, that rose, and a lot of it had to do with the tax code being done to favor business in America. Now that index is just plunging, and it's apparently this is something a lot of economists who are following the Federal Reserve are saying, hey, what's with this? And it's obvious what's with this. It's the tax code's favoring businesses overseas, and that's where all the money's going, and that's why everything's getting screwed up. Well, one of the reasons why I think everything's getting screwed up over here. But anyway, like I said, I sent you a paper on this.
I'm looking at it right now.
Yeah, and it's... Anyway, it's about this. Like I said, I remember this was an index that we used to follow, and it's just right now it's at its worst. And it's like it's interesting in a sense that the Federal Reserve now is not even looking at it, and it's just and all their own indices that they follow indicate that we're screwed.
Well, this economy isn't working any longer. It's already failed. It's just on life support to keep it going, looking like it's healthy. And there is really no one cause why this is so. We're looking at the effects of several overlapping phenomenon that all contributed to the decline of the American economy, the loss of manufacturing, the loss of agriculture, a corporate culture that turns its back on the idea of manufacturing its own products, the predatory nature of private central banking. There's a lot of overlapping factors that have led us to this particular point here. But the Federal Reserve, they pick and choose what they want to look at. They're looking for reinforcement that everything's hunky-dory. I remember a few years back when they stopped putting out what was called the M3 aggregate, which was the hard measure of the amount of inflation because it was supposed to be the total amount of U.S. currency, Federal Reserve currency, in circulation. And that had been going up and going up and going up. It was signaling the beginning of hyperinflation. And one month they just simply said, oh, that's not a number the American people need to know, and they stopped reporting it.
That was Ben Bernanke who pulled that.
You're right. That's Ben Bernanke who did that.
Mm-hmm. But anyway, just reading this, I mean, this sort of brings back memories from the 80s, and I'm convinced we are definitely screwed.
It's only a matter of time. It's only a matter of time here. And Wall Street and Washington, D.C., their attitude is that the American people's wallet will solve all problems. Those wallets are empty. There's nothing left here out in the hinterland that you're going to grab to prop up this Ponzi scheme. We're going to let you go, Malcolm. Switch over to Frank in Boston. Aloha, Frank. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. Actually, I'm actually a reverend, and we believe in something tangible, not God. We believe actually that the moon landing was fake.
All right. Well, what's on your mind for your phone call today?
Well, actually, of all topics, actually the about the Kennedy assassination and other factors. There's actually a lot of conspiracy theorists believe that Bush may have been involved. There's a lot of books. I think Webster Toffley may have mentioned it, and the Bush perhaps was in Dallas at the time of the assassination. A lot of people are saying that. And
there's actually a photograph in Dealey Plaza that does appear to show him. It looks very, very much like him, and that's actually in my JFK page.
And it's actually, and then also pretty bizarre. And then one of the guys that hired was actually some conspiracy video I saw on Netflix, and fabulous film. I mean, it wasn't that important, big great film anyway, but it was one of the guys that had Bush's nickname Poppy.
Yes.
In one of the books, one of the guys involved in the assassination. So Bush may have been involved, we don't know, and it could be a wide conspiracy.
Well, Bush's involvement with the CIA went back way before that. He apparently was supplying some of the ships that were being used by the Cuban brigades for the Bay of Pigs, and he supplied 3 ships. One was called the Houston, one was called the Barbara, and I think the last one was called Zapata or Zapista or something like that. That were named for his hometown, his wife, and the oil company that he had at the time. And he was apparently recruited into the operation by legendary CIA asset Felix Rodriguez, who, for a CIA agent, actually became quite famous, almost legendary. And so, yeah, there's also a memo that surfaced that confirmed that Bush was involved with the CIA much, much earlier than he publicly acknowledged later on when he became head of the CIA.
Well, there's other conspirators. You're against the missile theory in the Pentagon. Now, this is perhaps an interesting theory because a lot of people think that military aircraft were used, and you don't have to agree with it, but they believe a military aircraft were.
Okay, I'm going to cut you off here because we're coming up on a commercial break, and when I come back, I will go through one more time the logical reasons for why there was no missile at the Pentagon. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. Now, there is a very old propaganda trick called poisoning the well. And that is when the people start asking questions about whatever the official story may be, government assets will plant a piece of nonsense into the discussion to give the corporate media an easy handle to ridicule and dismiss the whole question. And we have seen it used time and time again. They planted the fingerprint man witness on Jim Garrison to destroy his case against Clay Shaw. The umbrella man on the motorcade route in the Kennedy assassination was another good example. And in the case of 9/11, the poison the well tactic is this idea that there really wasn't a passenger jet crashing into the Pentagon. And inevitably, you've seen it, whether it's Popular Mechanics, whatever, any stories that come out that attempt to ridicule the 9/11 truth movement, inevitably they will go to that and say, these people don't even think there was a jet there at the Pentagon. No, we don't. The only ones pushing that idea are working for the U.S. government. Remember what I said when you're trying to evaluate whether you're being told something that is true or not. Look for what should be there and isn't. And what isn't there in the story of no plane at the Pentagon is a reason. They have to get rid of the plane anyway. They have to get rid of the passengers anyway. They're going to have an aftermath that looks consistent with airplane wreckage. Why not crash the plane into the Pentagon? Nobody's been able to come up with a reason why the government would risk exposure of a deception. There isn't one. There is nothing to be gained by some magic subterfuge that swaps a missile for the 757. It just isn't there. And I reprised my article laying out all the reasons why this no plane at the Pentagon nonsense is planted poison the well propaganda. It's to the front page of whatreallyhappened.com, and you can go there and you can read that. We're going to go back to the phones here. Nick in Japan. Aloha, Nick. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yes, I have basically a quick question and just kind of a general statement. I noticed that elite power always move very decisively anytime there's a threat to their security. Mm-hmm. And what I was trying to say last week is that we're sort of driven more along party, ideological, racial lines. If you look at history, ideologically, I mean, it takes us a long time to get rid of dictators. You look at Zimbabwe, he's still in power. And so historically, it normally takes us a very long time. But the main point is, I know one of the things that you maintain, and I've been listening to your show, as you know, for a while, is that the people are angry and that they've had enough. But when I look at the situation, the real facts seem to suggest that, with the Iraq War, we've got 7.7 billion people on the planet. With the Iraq War, just the rough estimates, we were able to generate about 10 million people globally to protest that war. I mean, that's less than 0.1.
I don't know that that's necessarily accurate, because certainly my experience with the protests that we had here in Hawaii was that the corporate media was always wholly focused on demonstrations in favor of the war and absolutely ignored anti-war demonstrations.
I noticed that.
Yeah.
I noticed that. But
I
mean, even if at our estimates, we've got a population of 316 million people, and we're looking at, just 2 million? Even if we were to throw an extra million, I'm saying that we don't have these significant numbers to get power to sort of acquiesce to the demands of the people. We've got to come out in significant numbers, and we're not doing that. And I think the current situation is
hang on. Let me come back on that. I think the significant numbers are there. But after so many years of mounting these demonstrations and protests, I think the vast majority of people understand the government isn't listening, the corporate media isn't paying attention, but that doesn't mean these people are not angry and outraged. And again, if you want to find out, and I recommend this to all of our listeners, go out and talk to your friends about what's going on. Because these days I can't find anybody who isn't furious about what's going on. And you shouldn't confuse the absence of organized demonstrations in the street with a mass public apathy. Okay? All right, we're going to let you go then, Nick. Thank you very much for the phone call. People are angry. We're seeing it all the time. And the corporate media is trying to hide it. We're seeing time and time again they're blatantly rigging the poll numbers of their own polls to try and say, people are okay with this stuff. No, they're not. Go out and talk to your friends, your family, your coworkers, and ask them how they feel about what's going on, and you will discover there is a huge amount of anger out there. Another indicator, if you're like me, you've noticed that all of a sudden you're seeing a lot more aggressive and angry behavior on the roads. People are taking their anger out behind that steering wheel, which is unfortunately, sadly, contributing to more traffic accidents. But you can just see the manifestations of the anger in our entire society. And it's being kept inside because we've all been brainwashed to think that anger is bad. We should manage our anger and stay calm and the rest of it. And that, of course, is complete nonsense. We evolved to feel anger and rage for a reason. It is a survival mechanism, because that rage and anger gives us the energy to do what must be done against those who we perceive as a threat to ourselves and our loved ones. So it's okay to be angry with what's going on. If you're not angry with what's going on, you're on meds. All righty, let's see here. Moving on back to the news here, let's see. Countries respond to NSA surveillance. We already talked about that. The NSA spy scandal is a diplomatic disaster around the world. We have all these countries who are bringing in the U.S. ambassadors and saying, you're not supposed to be doing this. And the ambassadors are saying, well, I will convey your concerns to my government's leadership. But all these countries who are finding this NSA spying, they're discovering that the NSA is not spying on criminals or terrorists. They're spying on law-abiding citizens, business people. They're conducting industrial espionage on behalf of American corporations against other companies and other nations. And that is absolutely not justified under U.S. law, and it's certainly not justified with the idea of a war on terror, because this CryptoLocker hacker proves that real terrorists are invisible to the NSA. They can't find the guy. This system isn't set up to find terrorists and criminals. It's set up to keep an eye on you so you will not be thinking those bad thoughts about the government. Now, Dianne Feinstein, who's just a big cheerleader for the NSA, she's out there in her short skirt and her pom-poms going, give me an N, give me an S, give me an A. And she's come out there saying that the NSA's massive snooping operations against all Americans and the rest of planet Earth are not surveillance. Really, just because they're spying on everybody, that should not be construed as surveillance. So let me see if I have the list correctly. Freedom is slavery. War is peace. Ignorance is strength. Cooling is warming. Raising the debt ceiling is not raising the debt. And now spying is not surveillance. We are well and truly into George Orwell territory right here. I kind of have to wonder what little blackmail goodies the NSA has on Dianne Feinstein. Maybe they found the smoking Twinkie. Now, not too long ago, a secure email service closed its doors rather than capitulate to NSA demands to install a backdoor to allow the NSA to spy on traffic sent through their service, and now we have another one. CryptoSeal Virtual Private Network has now shut down rather than go along with demands by the NSA to allow the NSA to surveil their customers. And all of this, of course, is a violation of the Fourth Amendment. The government is not allowed to peek inside your life absent allegations of an actual crime supported by oath or affirmation before a court and a judge. Now, the NSA is doing what they do because supposedly the Foreign Intelligence Service Act court says it's okay. But FISA doesn't have jurisdiction inside the United States. That's why foreign is in the name. We'll be back after Phyllis Schlafly and some commercials. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. We're going to go back to the phones here real quick. Kogi, I don't know where you're calling from. What is on your mind today?
Kogi lupus. Kogi is Cherokee for crow, and lupus, of course, is Greek or ancient Latin for wolf. I use that handle. Well, even this fact that the NSA is tape recording this conversation, they already know my real name and where I live. So.
Well, that's I tend not to use last names on the air here, but what's on your mind?
Zionism. I'd like to know if you and your listeners are aware of a few documentaries available on YouTube. One is entitled The Real Israel, and it's about 54 minutes long. It's presented by a Christian reverend, and well, we won't get into religion, but nonetheless, his name is Ted Pike. The Real Israel can be found on YouTube.
And what is the point that he's making in the video?
Well, he goes in a synagogue and goes right to the library and takes the Hebrew Encyclopedia, the Israeli Encyclopedia, and the Talmud out, and pans his camera down on paragraphs about the atrocities presented and practiced by Zionist Jews specifically.
Okay, well let me cut you off right here, because if you go into the pretty much any religion's texts, you're going to find some stuff in there that really isn't very nice, and that's true of the Talmud. It's true of the Torah or Old Testament. Less true of the New Testament. There's a lot of ugly stuff out there. And Zionism isn't a religion, it's a political point of view about creating a Zionist homeland. It draws much of its justification from religion, just as much of the U.S. The government relies on religion to try and support their agenda. We know that Israel is very good at exploiting the so-called Christian Zionists with this whole end times myth to build political support. But Zionism is really a political movement rather than a religious one. We're going to switch over to Ruth in Chicago. Aloha, Ruth. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi. I've been trying to send you an email, and my Yahoo isn't working. Wayne Madsen did a report on Omidyar, the owner of eBay, and he attended the Punahou High School, and he started the same year that Obama graduated. He's going to be backing the new journalism venture with Glenn Greenwald. And I was trying to send you the article before you were on Coast to Coast tonight, in case NSA came up, and I can't seem to get it to Yahoo to do it, but maybe you could contact the editor on that and get updated.
Well, we're going to be talking about the NSA, but we're mostly going to be talking about its constitutional illegitimacy, the fact that it is very clearly targeted on spying on law-abiding citizens, that is not only not spying on criminals and terrorists, it is unable to. We're going to be focusing more on those issues. Okay?
Thank you.
All righty, and we're going to switch over to Alex in Texas. Alex, welcome back. Hopefully we've got a better connection this time.
Yes, hi, Mike. Can you hear me better this time?
I can hear you, but you still cut off every once in a while. I don't know what's going on here.
Okay. Well, I was just calling because I'd like to know, the second part of my question was about this video I saw on YouTube from this gentleman named Jacob Applebaum, and he was discussing the satellite networks that the NSA actually operates,
yes,
and how there's a network of satellites that are behind all the networks of satellites that only they have control of. And I was wondering, because I have been made aware of the fact that there is a consciousness web. I was wondering if those were the satellites that were providing the tapping in, I guess you could say, to what the other satellites are relaying.
Well, there is no question that NSA, CIA, NRO all have their own constellation of satellites. Most of them are known for the simple reason that in order to avoid collisions in orbit, they have to sort of tell some authority where they are and where they're going to be. Certainly in geosynchronous orbit, those slots are allocated by international treaty so that the satellites don't get too close together as they orbit around the Earth. Most of the satellites are involved in gleaning intelligence that is not directly reachable by hardline. There's, of course, Keyhole is a generic name applied to these giant telescopes that look down on the Earth. There was the Rhyolite series that were radio intercept, and I don't know what the modern designation of them is. But, yeah, everybody's spying on everybody up there. Now, in terms of intercepting what's going up and down regarding satellites, satellites in orbit can intercept the ground station transmissions, but because those transmissions are on such a narrow beam, it's actually much easier to listen to satellites from here on Earth rather than from another satellite in orbit near them.
Well, given the technology we have been exposed to, yes, but I mean, you yourself, being in the technical field, you know that there's technologies that we have not been made aware of yet.
Well, I understand that there's always technological advantages, but we're talking here basically about the physics of the radio waves and the idea that if you're in orbit with a bunch of satellites in front of you, pulling one satellite's transmission side lobe out of the clutter is going to be difficult. Is it possible? Maybe yes, but it's going to be easier and cheaper to do it with ground stations.
Have you seen the video?
No, I have not.
Can I send it to you?
Yeah, you can send me a link and I'll take a look at it, okay? And thank you for the call. We're running out of time. We're going to switch over to George in Texas. Aloha, George. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
How you doing? Look forward to listening to you on Coast to Coast tonight.
Thank you.
Well, the thing is about people being on edge. When people are on edge because food stamps are going to get cut next month. Also, too, it's like people are working 25 hours compared to 40 hours, and they don't know how they're going to pay the rent or the electric bill.
It's an ugly situation out there. Something like 90 million Americans are no longer in the workforce. That's almost 1/3 of the population. Now, yes, that includes children who are too young to work and elderly and retired, but this recent jobs report from September is very, very dismal. It shows a continuing decline in workplace participation. We know the government's job numbers include part-time jobs as a job, but the number of actual full-time workers with benefits is just, it's a desert out there. And again, under the press of Obamacare, we're seeing a lot of companies that are letting go their full-time career employees, and they're replacing them with 2 or 3 part-timers to save the cost. And, of course, that means the quality of products and services offered by those companies is likely to go down.
Well, the thing is, we got a White House that's just waging economic warfare against every American.
No, they're not waging economic warfare. They're pillaging, because this government is so deep in debt, and they won't admit it's because of that private central bank scam. And right now, their only solution to their self-made problems is to go after your wallet any way they can.
Well, you know, the thing is, I think once we get the new country back, that if a politician accepts any lobby money to work for the bankers while in office, that should be automatic treason, because that's giving aid and comfort to the enemy.
Well, obviously the lobbying situation is very much out of control. Citizens United just made it open season for large corporations to skew the political opinion, and we do have to go back to having these limits on the government, on lobbying, and certainly we have to have limits on political contribution, because that was supposed to be a measure of your popular support, not your corporate support. That was the reason for campaign contribution limitations. We got to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. Hello, hi America. Welcome back to the show here. Now, yesterday we were telling you this story about these police officers in New York who stopped a young man, and they found a little plastic bag with these blue crystalline pieces inside. Presumed it was some form of crystal meth. It's the blue stuff from Breaking Bad. It's out there. It's the streets. It's real. And they locked the guy up for 24 hours before somebody over at the police lab realized they were holding a package of Jolly Rancher candy. Well, the good news is the gentleman who was held for 24 hours for no reason at all is now suing the New York Police Department. And I think those officers ought to be financially liable for that lawsuit. Because until we start making police officers personally liable for these abusive tactics, the problem's not going to go away. Another case where apparently another cop has shot a family dog in front of the mother and 2-year-old child who owned the dog. Wasn't even dealing with them, was just doing something else, and the dog barked and he pulled out his gun and shot the dog. It's amazing. Now, remember what I was saying before about how in the weeks leading up to the Kennedy assassination, Fidel Castro, who we have been told is an evil, cruel dictator, was a tyrant, and yet he was buying rifles and giving them to the Cuban people to hold off a potential new invasion by the United States of America. Meanwhile, in this country, of course, we have a government supposedly of a free nation that is absolutely adamantly trying to disarm the entire country. Now, apparently, in a joint bulletin issued by the Department of Homeland Security and the FBI, they're now adding to the list of potential terrorists people with too many guns. If you have too many guns, that may indicate terrorist or criminal activity. So now gun collectors are terror suspects, along with Hollywood prop houses that have a lot of guns. And I'll show you how bogus this whole thing is. How many guns did the Tsarnaev brothers have? I don't recall that they had very many at all, if they had any. It's just an attempt to demonize people with guns. Because the gun grab is back on again. They know the American people are angry. They know that 80% of the population of the United States owns at least one gun. All of a sudden, have you noticed we've got this flurry of shootings taking place all across the country? Oh, they're getting ready to come for the guns again. They absolutely are. Alrighty, let's see. Israel has become a major hub in the international cocaine trade. This is being reported over at the internetpost.net. We already know that Israel is the center of world ecstasy production, and what's really funny here, because Hollywood, when they make movies about cocaine criminals, it's always some swarthy South American or a black guy. You never see some nice Jewish boy being the cocaine seller. But apparently, Israel is a major hub in the flow of cocaine around the world here. You know, I'm getting sick and tired of that word consensus. We see it all over the place. We have Al Gore and his ilk, the carbon Nazis, out there saying, there's a consensus, the climate is changing, and it's your fault, and you will atone with carbon taxes. And by the way, the LA Times ran a story just a couple of months ago where climate change caused the end of the late Bronze Age civilizations. See what happens when you don't pay a carbon tax. If those Bronze Age people had paid a carbon tax, they'd still be around. Actually, they are still around. They're our ancestors. And it's, climate changes. It always has. It always will. There is no way to stop it. It's just another classic political case of taking something that happens naturally, ordinarily, declaring it to be a crisis, and then offering to sell a solution in exchange for obedience and tax money. So now we're getting over to this issue about GMO foods because there are a couple of contentious political campaigns ramping up to have GMO labeling on the ballot in a couple of states. And already the industry money is pouring into these campaigns to oppose labeling. They're just absolutely adamant that you are not allowed to know what you're putting in your mouth. And there's a story over in naturalblaze.com where the reality is that actually going out and talking to dietitians, doctors, and so forth proves that this claimed consensus on the safety of GMO foods does not exist. And apparently there's an international group of more than 90 scientists, academics, and physicians who have basically gone public and said there is no consensus. It is something that is used to try and convince you that GMO food is safe and that humans are causing global warming. By the way, Michael Crichton had a saying that is very valid here. If it's science, it's not consensus. And if it's consensus, it's not science. Go back and look at Galileo, who with his telescope determined that in point of fact the Earth orbits the Sun along with the other planets. Now the consensus of his day was the Earth was the unmoving center of the universe, which is why the church behaved so rudely to him. And so consensus doesn't necessarily mean right. Consensus is usually the face of groupthink. Ooh, I want a piece of that funding, so I'll go along and think what they're thinking, because they're handing out the money. The golden rule of science. Whoever's handing out the gold decides the science. But consensus is very often wrong. Whether it's the consensus that witches are real, that the world is flat, that magic pink unicorns cause the rain. The majority is not always right. In fact, throughout history, usually the majority is wrong, especially in science. Because before the majority can be right, one person has to be right. And while that one person stands alone being right, the majority are wrong. Now, ruling bodies in ancient times used religion to control the population, but religion is on the wane. It doesn't hold our minds in quite the iron grip that it used to. And so now corporate political interests try and cloak their agendas with scientists. They're trading in the priest's robes for a white laboratory coat. And they hire a bunch of scientists to stand up and say, oh, yes, this is so, in the hope that you will look at that white laboratory coat and the little fancy gold plaques all over the wall and say, oh, this is a person who knows what they're talking about. I should just take what they say at face value. And we know that that is extraordinarily dangerous to do. Now, another story coming out here, this is over at Natural News. The chemical in Roundup, the glyphosate, has been demonstrated to disrupt the endocrine system in people who eat it. And it's now been documented it can cause cancer in parts per trillion levels. There is no safe exposure. Another study has come out linking GM soybeans to cancer. Now, I understand that when the food is cooked, the DNA, the modified DNA, is destroyed. The problem is that during the plant's growth cycle, the altered DNA is producing altered proteins. The problem is the protein expression. And those proteins can survive cooking. They can break into chunks and create prions, which are another disease-causing mechanism that is not well understood. And this is all coming out of the journal Food and Chemical Toxicology. It's just all over the place. And Monsanto is unable to sell their GMO products to the rest of the world, so by golly, they will force you, the American people, to buy them. And the government is going to say, that's right, you don't need to know what's in the food. We're the government. We would never lie to you. We're going to take a break for commercials. We will be right back. America, welcome back to our show today. And I want to talk a little bit about the vaccine problem. Now, as I've said before, if the U.S. government was really concerned about your health, They would do something about those 400,000 Americans who die every year from mistakes made by doctors, hospitals, and pharmacies. They don't even want to address the issue. If the U.S. government was really concerned about your health, they would start doing something about all the toxic adjuvants that are in vaccines that are now proven to cause harm. They'd be doing something about all these patented pharmaceutical medications that have these serious, serious side effects. They would be pulling some of these harmful additives out of corporate manufactured food at the supermarkets, and they would certainly at least allow GMO labeling, if not an outright ban on GMO. Allow people to decide. Allow people the freedom to decide if they want to avoid GMO. But this government is taking the position, no, you do not have the freedom to decide what you're eating. You will eat what we tell you to eat, and you will like it. And you know from this fight over GMO labeling that they know it's not good. If GMO were actually good, it would be all over the labels, contains GMO. And they'd say, yeah, I want my dose of that. But when they work this hard to keep you from knowing what's going on, it tells you they know it's not really good for you. It's good for their bottom line. It's good for their profitability. It makes their stockholders happy, but it's not good for you. Now, getting on to the vaccine issue. There is an article in the British Medical Journal that is casting even more negative light on the Gardasil vaccine. And we know that a lot of girls who've been given this medication have suffered serious medical harm, and all to basically protect them from an illness they have less than a 0.1% chance of ever encountering in life. And apparently there was a young patient down in Australia who, after she was given Gardasil, 16-year-old girl was given Gardasil and went into menopause. Ovaries failed and her body started going through all those chemical changes normally associated with women in their 40s and 50s. And she was 16. Dangerous, reckless stuff. Another article, this is over at Natural Blaze. Apparently, there's been another research paper by CDC epidemiologist Tom Verstraeten using the CDC's own vaccine safety data link data, and he presented this at the Simpsonwood Conference Center, showing there is a link between vaccines and autism symptoms. Now, there was a lot of research going on about this, but in the Homeland Security Act that created the Department of Homeland Security, there was a rider that indemnified all vaccine manufacturers for the harm their vaccines would cause, on the theory that in the event of a biological act of terrorism, we would have to fast-track the vaccines, mistakes might be made, and we can't punish the vaccine makers for those errors. Now, there hasn't been a massive vaccination program in response to a biological act of terror. But the vaccines go out, they're causing harm, and nobody can sue. And that was the reason why a lot of this research into the link between vaccines and autism was simply dropped, because the possibility of some kind of a court settlement to cover the costs evaporated. But the data is definitely out there. Now, Mayor Bloomberg, who just got his Genesis Award for being a really swell guy to Israel, is now proposing a plan to mandate that all children under the age of 5 who are going to attend daycare have to get the annual flu vaccination and pneumococcal vaccines before they're allowed to go into daycare. And these are dangerous vaccines that already have a track record of causing harm. My goodness here. This was an article, this came out a little while ago in Natural News, where this was over, it started in Great Britain, where basically the pharmaceutical industry and the medical establishment were colluding to conceal from parents the dangers of the vaccines they were being told their children needed. It's a big moneymaker. It's a wonderful scam. They're selling medicines to people who aren't actually sick. Now, there's another article I just put up at whatreallyhappened.com which raises an interesting possibility regarding the so-called Spanish flu. And it's a slightly different take on the story. Now, for those who don't remember, the name Spanish flu was an outright piece of propaganda because the flu did not originate or come from Spain. It actually erupted first in the U.S. Army Medical Base, supposedly in the middle of trials of multiple vaccines, where 7 guys literally dropped dead in the doctor's office. They couldn't even get out of the office. And it was not recognized at the time that if you do multiple vaccines into somebody at the same time, the onslaught on their body may be too great for them to survive. So World War I was over, and the story in this article I just put up at whatreallyhappened.com is the vaccine makers didn't want to just dump all these vaccines they'd made for the soldiers, so they launched a PR campaign to convince Americans that returning soldiers from overseas were bringing all these horrible diseases with them. And they launched a massive public vaccination campaign that coincided with the eruption of the grip, the so-called Spanish flu, all across the United States and from there around the world. It's all about making money. And they do cause harm, and we're not supposed to look at it. We're supposed to revere the medical industry and the medical professionals with the same respect and unquestioning belief that we revere churches. And when we actually look behind the facade, we see reasons to be very, very cautious. Because it's all driven by money. Not what is good for the people, but just pumping something into their arm that they'll have to pay for. Another failure story, again from Natural News. The whooping cough vaccine apparently does not last. Remember, you're supposed to get the vaccine and you are forever protected from this illness. And apparently the current vaccine that's been in use since 1990 loses half its effectiveness every single year. So if you get the whooping cough vaccine, 5 years later, you can get the whooping cough. They're just not working very well. Now then, you probably noticed on the corporate media there's a war going on with the tablets. It's the tablet wars, and Microsoft is out there and so forth and so on. And a lot of people were commenting on how Apple's share of the tablet business has been in decline because of the high price of the original iPad. And Apple is now coming out with a smaller, less expensive iPad. I think they launched it today. I think Apple's fortunes are going to be okay, because the lower-cost tablets, especially the really low-cost tablets, don't perform. And I know that from personal experience because when we needed to get my wife a tablet, we got her one of the low-end tablets, which was nothing but problem after problem after problem until it finally died just a few weeks outside the warranty, which would not have helped anyway because the company's gone out of business. So on the theory that I would rather spend the money to buy one quality product rather than 6 or 7 use a year and then throw away, I bought my wife an iPad. And I'm going to tell you she's deliriously happy with it. We have no problems with it. I think it was worth the money. And because all of Microsoft's tablet offerings are coming with Windows 8, I'm not at all inclined to do that. So anybody who's dissing Apple and their sales numbers right now, yes, they've gone down, and I think that's reflective of the economy as a whole, but I would expect them to do a lot better because they do have a track record. Their products do hold up. I remember the last time we were looking at changing our cell phone provider, and we went into the competing store, and I was looking at some of their smartphone offerings, and like 3 of them were already dead there in the store on display. Little random stripes all over the screen, all kinds of problems like that, and they're saying, yeah, we got problems with these things. Really, in the long run, you're going to be time and money ahead if you go ahead and buy a quality product and get off this treadmill of buying something that lasts until just outside the warranty and collapses. Now, I know for a lot of our consumer goods, that just doesn't exist anymore. Products are designed to fail. They have a product life cycle at the end of which you throw away what you've got and go out and buy a new one, rather than have something that's going to last you for a long, long, long time. All right, we're going to take a break for commercials. Back with the last segment of our show after these words from our sponsors. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Last segment of the program today. The corporate media is still going on and on about the revelations that, in point of fact, the Obamacare software system was tested just weeks before the launch and failed utterly, and yet was still launched on time, just like the Challenger was. And people are starting to ask, if they knew this thing was not working and could not be fixed in time, why did they go ahead? Was it driven by Obama's ego? Because it's got his name on it. It's Obamacare. Or are they that desperate for the expected windfall in new tax revenues from people buying these hideously expensive health care insurance policies with high deductibles that are going to generate trillions in profit for the health care industry, or the health insurance industry that pretty much wrote this thing to begin with? They went ahead and did it anyway, and it's calling into question not only Obamacare itself, certainly not the healthcare.gov website, but the quality of decision-making coming out of this administration at this particular time. Meanwhile, there's a very interesting story, and I'm seeing this in the European press, but not here in the mainstream press right now. A federal judge today has refused to dismiss a case that has the potential to cripple Obamacare. And it has to do with the fact that inside the Obamacare law, the Affordable Care Act forbids the federal government from enforcing the law in any state that opted out of setting up its own health care exchange. And apparently 36 states chose not to set up their exchanges, and apparently the IRS overstepped its authority by paying subsidies in those states to try and lure people into Obamacare, and they broke their own law. And a group of small businessmen are taking this to court, and the judge said the case can proceed. This could lock Obamacare up in the courts for months. Meanwhile, during the government shutdown, this kind of went unnoticed. The United States Post Office did in fact default on some $5.6 billion in required payments for their pension program for their past employees. Now, the post office is in the process already of raising the price of postage stamps, which is going to be counterproductive because more and more people are sending communication by email. They're sending packages through UPS and FedEx. And as the prices go up for the post office, demand for its service is going to go down. And the post office is also saying they may be forced by financial pressures to renege on the agreements they made with their workers regarding their pension plans. It always comes down to just taking away from the most vulnerable segment of our society, the retirees, whether it's looting Social Security or screaming about union pensions that got defunded during the 2008 collapse, and now the post office is going to do it to their own workers. Anyway, let's see what else is going on here. Down in Texas, a little bit of an argument where publishers of Texas school books refuse to include creationism in science textbooks, despite screams coming, oh, you've got to put it in there, you've got to put it in there. You know, and I'm sorry, religious people already have a place where they can share their fantasies about the imaginary playmate in the sky. They're called churches, and they get generous tax breaks to sit there. So people who want to talk about the imaginary playmate in the sky can gather there, and they can talk about it, and they can have fun, and that's just fine. But schools are for teaching about the real world. Science classes are for teaching about science. And I have yet to see a church that would allow evolution to be taught inside their hallowed halls. A little bit of a double standard. It's inappropriate to confuse science students with the hallucinations of a bunch of illiterate goat herders from 2,000 years ago, who thought women were made from a man's rib, that the earth rested on pillars, and every animal on the planet lived within walking distance of Noah's place. There is a place for religion, it's called church. There's a place for science, it's called the science class. And we should not blur the two. I mean, we're already looking at a new generation of Americans who are woefully inequipped to compete in a global technological marketplace. And if we send these young people out there saying the transistor works because God made it so, they're not likely to find gainful employment out there. Meanwhile, there's another scandal over in Germany involving a Catholic bishop who spent something like 25 million pounds of church money on his new palatial home, even as the new pope is saying that we should all go for a more humble and austere lifestyle. And a really, really tragic story that happened in Washington, D.C. There was this woman, 26 years old, was studying to become a Catholic nun, was sexually active, became pregnant, wanted to conceal that because if you're having fun and getting pregnant, they basically are not going to let you become a nun. And she smothered her own newborn baby to death because she wanted to be a nun. And she's now been charged with first-degree murder, as well she should be. I seek a world free from the chains of belief, because that's what belief is. It's a chain placed on free minds. No chain of iron or steel ever bound a human being tighter than the chains made of the beliefs with which we are indoctrinated as little children before we're old enough to realize the big people are full of it. Whether it's belief in the imaginary playmate, belief in the morality and sanctity of the clergy, belief in honest politicians, belief in benevolent government. Those who want you to believe are then in a position to use those beliefs to control you. And you should never believe. You should find out the facts to as many decimal places as you can find. And this will be a far better world, a far better civilization, when humans stop relying on belief to make their decisions and say, I will wait for the facts. I will rely on knowledge. And as we close the show today, I want to go back to this question I'm going to keep asking when we talk about the debt ceiling going on. And I need you all to go out there and ask this question of your friends, your co-workers, students, people at the store. In the coming weeks, when they're back to talking about the debt ceiling and getting the debt under control, this is the question you need to ask. The Constitution gives the U.S. government the authority to create and issue debt-free currency for use by the public, for use by the government. Why then, for the last 100 years, has this government borrowed the public currency at interest from a privately owned bank, plunging this nation into the debt crisis we now face? They don't want you to ask that question. You're never going to hear this question on the corporate media because they don't have an answer for it. The only answer is 100 years ago, the bankers bribed Congress and a president to sell the American people into the debt slavery of private central banking, and not for the first time in our nation's history. But that's the question every American needs to ask, especially as the government lines up with their hands grasping at our wallets yet again. Why are we even in debt? I understand debt that was borrowed from private investors in other countries. But why is the government going to the Federal Reserve, which is just creating the money out of thin air, and borrowing it at interest, when the government has the authority to create that same money out of thin air? If the government can issue a dollar bond, it can issue a dollar bill. The difference is one favors the bankers and one favors the American people. So get out there and ask that question, because we're deserving of an answer. And we certainly cannot continue on the path that this nation is on right now. It is obvious this system is doomed. We just stay calm, wait patiently, be nonviolent. Don't give the government an excuse to declare martial law and a national emergency. And it's going to come down. It's going to come down by itself. All right, there's the music. It's time for Claire and I to get out of here and get something useful done with the rest of the day. We will be back tomorrow here on the Republic Broadcasting Network. Until then, stay safe, stay angry, stay skeptical, stay informed, make good choices. Please visit Republic Broadcasting, hit the donate button. Please buy physical silver and physical gold from the Republic Trading Group. And don't forget, I'm going to be on Coast to Coast tonight for all 3 hours of the show tonight, and we should be having a lot of fun covering a lot of topics. Until tomorrow, aloha America.